My name is Claire Bennett. I am 29 years old, and I run a boutique interior design studio in Austin, Texas. 3 years ago, my husband's family pushed me out of my own home and told me I would never survive without them. Last Monday, my mother-in-law walked into my studio with a lawyer and handed me a document demanding 40% of everything I had built. I smiled, signed nothing, and what happened next left them walking out in complete silence. But before I tell you what I did, please like and subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and drop a comment telling me what you think she deserved. It was a regular Monday morning. My team was setting up mood boards for a new client presentation. The coffee was still hot. I was reviewing fabric samples at my desk when my front desk assistant, Rachel, knocked on my office door with an expression I had never seen on her before. A mixture of confusion and something close to alarm. "Claire," she said carefully, "there's a woman in the lobby. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but she's not leaving. She brought someone with her. A man in a suit." I set down the fabric sample. "Did she give a name?" Rachel hesitated. "She said to tell you it's your mother-in-law." The room didn't change. The morning light was still the same. The coffee was still steaming. But something inside me went very still, the way a lake goes still right before a storm moves in. I had not spoken to my ex-husband's mother in over 2 years, not since the divorce. Not since the night she sat across from me at her dining room table and told me, with her hands folded neatly in her lap, that I had never been good enough for her son, and that the sooner I accepted that, the easier things would be for everyone. I had accepted it. I had accepted it and walked away and spent the next 26 months building something real from almost nothing. And now she was standing in my lobby. "Put them in the small conference room," I said. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I did not go in 5 minutes. I took 10. I finished reviewing the fabric sample. I poured a second cup of coffee. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, at the people moving through their ordinary Monday morning, and I reminded myself of something I had learned the hard way. Calm is not the absence of feeling. Calm is a choice you make when the feeling is loudest. Then I walked down the hall. My mother-in-law, Diane, was sitting at the head of the small conference table as though she had been invited to chair a meeting. She was dressed the way she always dressed, neat and deliberate, every detail calculated to communicate that she was a woman who expected to be taken seriously. The man beside her was younger, maybe 40, with a leather portfolio open in front of him. "Claire," Diane said when I walked in. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement that I had arrived on time. "Diane," I said. I pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. I did not offer coffee. I did not smile. "You don't have an appointment." "I didn't think I needed one," she said. "This won't take long." The man beside her slid a document across the table toward me. It was several pages, bound with a small clip, printed on heavy paper the way legal documents sometimes are when someone wants them to feel final. I didn't pick it up. "What is this?" I asked. Diane folded her hands the same way she had that night at her dining room table. "It's a claim," she said. "A formal one." "A claim on what?" She looked around the room slowly, the way someone does when they want you to feel that what they are about to say has weight. "On this," she said. "The studio, the business, the brand." I looked at her for a moment without speaking. "You want 40% of my design studio." "We believe 40% is reasonable," the man beside her said. He had a practiced, neutral voice, the kind that is trained to sound calm while delivering things that are not calm at all. "Given the circumstances of how the business originated." "The circumstances," I repeated. "The seed money," Diane said. Her voice was smooth. "The money that started all of this came from our family. From Marcus. Which means it came from us." Marcus was my ex-husband. We had been married for 3 years. For 2 of those years, I had been the one paying most of our bills while he moved between jobs he said were temporary. In the 3rd year, he received a small inheritance from his grandfather, and he gave me $18,000 of it for my business. He gave it to me, not as a loan, not as an investment, as a gift. On my birthday, in a card that said he believed in me more than I believed in myself. "That money was a gift," I said. Diane tilted her head slightly. Marcus sees it differently now. Does he? The lawyer cleared his throat. There is documentation suggesting the funds were intended as a joint investment with the expectation of shared returns. I looked at him. What documentation? He opened his portfolio and produced a single printed page. A text message exchange, he said, in which Marcus states, and I quote, that he hoped the business would take care of both of them someday. I almost laughed. Not out of amusement. Out of the specific exhaustion that comes from watching someone construct a story out of fragments carefully chosen to mean something they never meant. He said he hoped my work would take care of us, I said. As my husband, in our marriage, which no longer exists. The intent the lawyer began. I'd like to finish, I said. He stopped. I turned back to Diane. I looked at her for a long moment, and I thought about the version of myself from 3 years ago, sitting at her dining room table, being told I was not enough. I thought about the months after the divorce when I had worked from a corner of my apartment, taking every client I could find, eating cereal for dinner because I was putting every dollar back into the business. You came here, I said, to take 40% of something I built by myself. Diane did not flinch. You built it using our family's resources. $18,000, I said, which Marcus gave me as a gift. I have documentation of my own, Diane. 2 years of bank statements, tax filings, contracts. Every dollar that came into this business after that initial deposit is traceable, and every dollar came from client work I did myself. The claim isn't only about the money, she said. Then she paused, and something in her expression shifted. She reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table between us, face up, with a photo visible on the screen. I recognized it immediately. It was a design. One of my earliest commercial projects, a restaurant renovation I had completed in my 2nd year, the one that had been written up in a local design magazine and brought in my first major referral clients. Marcus helped develop that concept, Diane said. He was your husband. You discussed the project with him at home. He contributed ideas. He suggested we use wood paneling, I said flatly. Ideas are intellectual property, Claire. I looked at the photo on the phone. I thought about that project. I thought about the 4 months I had spent on it, the hours of sourcing materials, the 3 full concept revisions, the nights I had fallen asleep at my desk with a sketchbook in my hand. I thought about Marcus sitting on the couch suggesting wood paneling while watching television, and I thought about how far someone had to reach to call that a creative contribution. Then I thought about the thing I had done 8 months ago. The thing I had done quietly, without telling anyone, not because I was hiding it, but because I had learned by then that the work you do to protect yourself rarely needs an audience. I appreciate you coming in, I said. My voice was completely even. I'd like to respond to this properly, which means I'd like to do it in a formal setting, with my full team present, so that everything is on the record. Diane blinked. It was a small movement, barely visible, but I caught it. She had expected resistance, or she had expected me to fold. She had not expected this. You want a meeting, she said. Thursday, I said. 10 in the morning, here. I'll have my legal team present. You're welcome to bring yours. She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded once. Thursday, she agreed. The lawyer collected his portfolio. Diane stood and straightened her jacket. At the door, she turned back. I want you to understand something, Claire, she said. I have always respected what you've tried to do. This isn't personal. I held her gaze. I know, I said. That's what makes it so easy to respond to. She left. I stood in the conference room alone for a moment and let out a slow breath. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. There are things about my marriage I don't talk about often, not because they hurt too much, but because they are complicated in the way that all honest things are complicated. Marcus was not a bad person. He was someone who had been told his whole life that things would come to him, and so he waited for them, patiently and with genuine certainty. And when they did not come fast enough, he grew frustrated in a way that had nowhere to go except sideways. In the first year, we were happy. We were young and new to each other, and the world felt full of possibility. I was freelancing, taking small design jobs, starting to develop a real vision for what I wanted to build. He was between positions, but optimistic. In the second year, the optimism started thinning. He took a job he didn't like, quit it, took another. Diane called often. Every time she called, I could feel the conversation afterward, the subtle shift in how Marcus looked at what I was doing, like my momentum was somehow a comment on his. I never said that out loud. Maybe I should have. In the third year, when his grandfather passed and left him the inheritance, he gave me the $18,000, and for a brief moment things felt light again. He was generous. He was proud of me. He came to my first client meeting and shook hands with people and stood a little taller. But the studio started growing. And as it grew, something in the dynamic changed in a way I couldn't name until much later. The more successful I became, the quieter he got. Not angry, not unkind, just quiet in the way that means someone is doing math in their head and not liking the numbers. One evening, about 8 months before we separated, Diane came for dinner. Afterward, while I was in the kitchen, I heard her talking to Marcus in the living room. I was not trying to listen. I was putting dishes away, and their voices carried. "You should have a stake in it," she said. "You helped her start it. That should be documented." "She'd never go for that," Marcus said. "She doesn't have to go for it," Diane said. "It just has to be true." I stood in the kitchen with a plate in my hand and understood, in a single clear moment, several things at once. I did not say anything that night. I finished the dishes and joined them in the living room and smiled and talked about other things. But the next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra who I had met through a client and who I trusted completely, and I told her what I had heard. And Sandra said, "Let's get ahead of this." Over the next 6 months, quietly and carefully, we documented everything. Every expense, every contract, every payment. We obtained a signed letter from Marcus at the time of our divorce settlement, acknowledging that the $18,000 had been a personal gift with no expectation of return or equity. Marcus had signed it without much thought, in the middle of all the other paperwork, as people do. We registered every original design I had created with the U.S. Copyright Office. Every concept, every drawing. The restaurant renovation, all of it, my name only. Filed, dated, and official. And 8 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when I had a quiet hour, I had done one more thing. I had taken the complete financial history of the studio, every statement from day one, and had it independently audited and certified. Not because I thought I would need it, but because I had learned, standing in that kitchen with a plate in my hand, that preparation is not paranoia. It is respect for yourself. Thursday morning arrived gray and quiet. By 9:30, my conference room was full. Sandra was there, along with a paralegal and a financial consultant named James who had done our audit. My senior designer was present as a witness. The documents were organized in neat folders at every seat. Diane and her lawyer arrived exactly at 10. She looked the same as she had on Monday, composed and deliberate. But when she walked into the room and saw the people around the table, something in her posture changed slightly, a small recalculation. "Good morning," I said. "Please sit down." They sat. Her lawyer placed his portfolio on the table and looked at Sandra with the professional wariness that lawyers show each other when they realize the other side came prepared. "We appreciate Claire's willingness to meet," he began. "Of course," Sandra said pleasantly. "We have a few things to walk through before we discuss the claim." She nodded to James, who opened his folder and slid copies around the table. "This is a certified audit of Claire's studio from its founding to the present," Sandra said. "It documents every source of income, every operating expense, and the origin of all startup capital." The lawyer picked up the document and began reading. His expression did not change, but his eyes slowed down. "The initial $18,000 deposit," Sandra continued, "is documented here as a personal gift from Marcus Bennett to Claire Bennett, made on her birthday, with no conditions of equity or repayment. That characterization is supported by this." She slid another document across the table. A signed acknowledgement from Marcus, executed as part of the divorce settlement, in which he confirms the funds were a gift. Diane looked at the document. Her hands were still folded on the table, but her knuckles had gone slightly pale. Regarding the intellectual property claim, Sandra said, Claire has held registered copyright on all original designs produced by her studio since its second year of operation, including the restaurant project cited in your initial claim. She placed the copyright registrations on the table, all registered in Claire's name, all predating your client's current claim by more than a year. The lawyer set down the audit and picked up the copyright registrations. He was quiet for a long moment. Furthermore, James said, because it was his turn, the audit shows that as of the end of last fiscal year, the studio's net growth from that initial $18,000 deposit represents a return of approximately 4,100%. The success of this business is entirely attributable to client revenue generated by Claire's work. There is no financial basis for an equity claim. The room was quiet. Diane looked at me. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. Not defeated, not yet, but uncertain in the way that happens when someone has built a version of a story in their head and walked into a room where the actual record is sitting on the table in front of them. The text message, her lawyer said carefully. The exchange in which Marcus expressed hope for shared. We have the full exchange, Sandra said. She placed a printed transcript on the table. In context. Including the messages before and after the one you cited. Marcus was responding to Claire, telling him about a new client. He said he was proud of her and hoped her business would take care of both of them. He was referring to their marriage. The message was sent on their second wedding anniversary. The lawyer read the full transcript. He set it down slowly. I'd also like to add, Sandra said, and her voice remained entirely pleasant, that if this claim proceeds, we will be filing a counter motion documenting the conversation Claire overheard between your client and her son, in which your client suggested that equity documentation should be created retroactively without Claire's knowledge or agreement. That conversation is relevant to the question of intent. Diane's eyes came to me fast. You heard that? I did, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere on the street below, a truck moved past. The sound was distant and ordinary. In the room, no one moved. Her lawyer leaned toward her and spoke quietly near her ear. She listened with her eyes on the table. Then she straightened. We'll need time to review these documents, the lawyer said. Of course, Sandra said. We'll expect a response within 10 business days. If we don't receive one, we'll assume the claim has been withdrawn. Diane stood. She picked up her bag. Her lawyer collected his portfolio. At the door, she paused the same way she had on Monday, but this time she didn't turn around. She just stood there for a moment with her back to me. Then she walked out. Her lawyer nodded at Sandra once, a small professional acknowledgement, and followed. The room breathed. Sandra looked at me across the table and raised her eyebrows, which for her was the equivalent of a standing ovation. That's it? My senior designer asked. That's usually it, Sandra said, when the other side realizes the story they came in with isn't the story the paperwork tells. I looked at the documents still spread across the table. The audit. The copyright registrations. The signed gift acknowledgement. The full text exchange printed out on plain paper with the context they had tried to remove. I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, sitting at Diane's dining room table, being told I wasn't enough. I thought about the months after the divorce, the serial dinners, the corner of my apartment, the first client who had taken a chance on me because they liked the way I listened. I thought about standing in the kitchen with a plate in my hand, understanding something in one clear moment, and choosing to do something about it quietly instead of loudly. I did not feel triumph exactly. Triumph has a sharpness to it, a heat. What I felt was something more like the specific quiet that comes when a thing you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. Later that afternoon, Rachel brought me coffee without being asked. She set it on my desk and looked at me for a moment. Are you okay? She asked. Yes, I said. And I meant it. 3 weeks later, Sandra called to tell me the claim had been formally withdrawn. No explanation, no apology. Just a one-page letter from the lawyer stating that his client had decided not to pursue the matter. I read the letter once, then folded it and placed it in the back of a filing cabinet. Some people wait for an apology. I understand that. There is something in us that wants the person who hurt us to see it clearly, to name it, to say the words. I wanted that too, for a long time. But I had learned something in the years of building this business from nothing, in the long nights and the difficult clients and the moments of doubt that no one else ever saw. I had learned that the most important acknowledgement you will ever receive is the one you give yourself, quietly, when no one is watching. Diane had walked into my studio expecting to find someone still shaped by what she had said at that dining room table 3 years ago. She had expected someone smaller, someone who had not done the work. What she found instead was the paperwork. And the paperwork told the true story, the one I had been living while she was busy writing a different version. I still run my studio in Austin. We just signed our largest contract yet, a full commercial redesign for a hotel group expanding across 3 cities. Rachel got a promotion. My senior designer is mentoring 2 junior staff members who remind me of myself at 24, full of ideas and not yet sure they have permission to use them. I tell them what no one told me early enough. You don't need permission. You need documentation. And you need to start building your record long before anyone thinks to challenge it, not out of fear, but out of the deep and steady knowledge that what you are making is worth protecting. That is the story no one warns you about when you start a business. Not the hard work, because everyone warns you about that. Not the long hours or the difficult clients or the uncertainty of early years. The part no one warns you about is that sometimes the people who should be cheering loudest will find a reason to knock instead. And your job, when that happens, is not to be surprised. Your job is to open the door, invite them into the conference room, and let the record speak. Mine spoke just fine.